Hi, this is Spider-Man, and I'd love to stick around and listen to amazing spider talk, but Madam Web just told me Doc Ock is about to kidnap Mary Jane Watson, and well, a spider's gotta do what a spider's gotta do.
Two men who know the angles, uncover and untangle all the questions and the webs left out to tangle. In 1962, last Wednesday's afternoon, they'll bend your ears with reckless self-abandon. The amazing spider talk. The amazing spider talk. Come swing through the air, sit back and prepare for the amazing spider talk.
Hello and welcome to the Amazing Spider Talk. My name is Dan Gvozden, and I'm the founder and editor of SuperiorSpiderTalk.com. Thanks for joining me for a special episode of our weekly show. If this is your first time joining us for this podcast, we hope you enjoy the podcast and that it provides an intelligent conversation between me and several Spider-Man creators as we hope to look at the Spider-Man comic universe in a bit of a bigger picture. And if you enjoy this show, please be sure to subscribe to our podcast feed to hear more. For this episode, I'm joined by some special guests from Spider-Man the Animated Series, everyone's favorite Spider-Man television show from the 90s. So let's not dilly-dally, it's time for the interview. Hello again, everyone. Dan Gvozden here for the Amazing Spider Talk, and today I'm joined by two very special guests. Our first guest is a returning friend of the show from 2 years ago. He's an accomplished screenwriter, producer, and story editor of some of your favorite animated television series, which have allowed him to work with creators like Jim Henson, George Lucas, and Stan Lee. He's the producer and story editor of Spider-Man the Animated Series, and probably friends with you on Facebook. Welcome back to the show, John Semper Jr.
Hi, Dan. Thank you for having me. I am excited to be here again, and I am excited to be here with Spider-Man himself. So this is going to be a fun day.
Yeah, I thought about our next guest just asking him questions as if he was Peter Parker, but our second guest is probably more familiar to most of our listeners as his voice has left an indelible impression on generations of film fans, television watchers, video game players, and a large part of the population that wears pajamas on Saturday mornings. He's probably not your friend on Facebook, but he was the voice of Eric in The Little Mermaid. He portrayed Greg Brady in the Brady Bunch films, favorites of mine, and enjoys long walks on the beach and has been the voice of Spider-Man more times than I can count, most notably in Spider-Man the Animated Series. Welcome to the show, Christopher Daniel Barnes.
Hey, Dan, thanks for having me. It's great to be here. And just a note, I only do American icons. You know, I only do Spider-Man and Greg Brady and Prince Eric. So that's my resume now.
Is that by choice? Have you turned down a lot of international icons?
Yeah, that's right. I only do Disney icons and Marvel icons. I think it's funny, my career has sort of lent itself to these wonderful roles that have this fantastic lineage to them and have sort of, spanned decades. It's incredible. It's a real honor, and I'm just thrilled to be a part of any of it.
Yeah, and from a very young age, too, yeah?
Yeah. I started acting when I was 8 years old, and I started in New York, actually, with television commercials and print jobs and that type of stuff. And then I came out here for a television series I did called Starman in 1986, and then it just sort of snowballed from there, and the rest is history. But it's just been a real interesting career, and it's been real wonderful to have had the opportunity to be a part of some of these projects, like Disney, Prince Eric, and like Spider-Man and the whole Brady thing, to be a part of these characters and these projects that have sort of endured for a lot of time and have a sort of a following of people that they've influenced. So it's been a real pleasure.
That's really cool. Chris, you've expressed in interviews that you were a big Spider-Man fan growing up, and that you collected comics. Can you remember your first introduction to the character or the Marvel Universe, and any stories that perhaps hooked you on this fictional world?
Well, I loved comics growing up as a kid. Obviously, Spider-Man was my favorite character. I think it was because Spider-Man, to me, I've said this before, Spider-Man is sort of he's the conflicted coming-of-age archetype. And I think that's why so many people relate to him. I think that's why he's sort of the conscience of Marvel, and even for instance, the new Civil War, or even the original comic line. He's the one that I think most people relate to for that reason, because he's always in turmoil. And how many of us are actually, not in turmoil? We're always sort of struggling and thinking and contemplating. And Spider-Man is that voice. And I think as a child and a young teenager growing up, that of course appealed to me, because Spider-Man was one of these characters that he was not the sort of Cold War hero, Superman, this sort of perfect, sort of distant Olympian figure that was sort of unattainable. Spider-Man was very real. He was very accessible and very relatable. And I think those qualities of the character just really drew him to a lot of people. And so I was, of course, I loved the character as a kid. And so growing up reading so many of the comics, I always had his voice in my head as I was, reading the comics. So I think that sort of naturally translated when I went to audition for the role. I was thrilled. I was utterly thrilled. I said in one interview, I was like Will Ferrell in Elf. I was like, Spider-Man! It's Spider-Man! I mean, I was absolutely out of my head with, thrilled that I was going to be auditioning for this character.
It's a good thing you didn't use that voice.
Yes, exactly. And it had sort of been a part of me growing up. So when it came time to do that, I was just sort of like, well, what voice have I heard as I've been reading these comics and participating in this sort of wonderful mythology my whole life, and there it was. So, yeah, I loved comics, and I loved the whole concept of the coming of age, conflicted hero. And even though I didn't understand a lot of that until I was older, reading things like Joseph Campbell, et cetera, but The Power of Myth and all that.
Yeah.
But it was just wonderful, and I love the whole Secret Wars stuff and all that stuff from the early '80s, mid '80s, and all the What If comics about Spider-Man. It's just utterly fascinating to me. It really spurred my my love of mythology, and I mean, let's face it, most people don't really read Bulfinch's mythology. A lot of people don't read the Aeneid and the Iliad and the Odyssey anymore. Some of us do, but some of us real hardcore geeks like to get into that stuff, but. A lot of people they access these mythic archetypes through comics, and that's, I think, the great gift of the comic book genre, is that it has allowed people to sort of access these perennial archetypes and really experience them and explore them in ways that was sort of has been lost to us in many ways. So it's been a real pleasure to be a part of that in any way.
Yeah, it makes sense that you were a Secret Wars kid. Did your parents buy you any of the action figures?
Yeah, I had all of it. I was an avid comic collector, so I would buy the comic to read, which I would, I would treat like a 15th century illuminated manuscript. I would be so.
You mean they aren't?
Yeah, well,
and then keep in mind who you're talking to here.
That's right. Well, so you understand. So I would buy the copy to read, and then I would find the perfect pristine copy, which would simply be placed in the plastic immediately and sealed with the cardboard cover, which was never to be touched by human hands again. And so I would buy 2 copies of everything. This was on my my allowance as a kid. This is what I was spending it on, and I'd catalog them all. This is before the days of computers. So I had little card catalogs of my comics. And so I was definitely into it, man. I was definitely into it.
Some of us might still be using card catalogs.
Well, if you don't have a little SQL database, right, you can use the card catalogs.
Is that something you've carried with you into your adulthood? I mean, not all of us are people in their 30s still buying comics or writing them like John over here. Is it something you keep up with still, or has it moved on to watching the movies and games or whatever?
What I found is that the love of comic books translated into a love of mythology as I got older, and then of course I realized the similarities between them, because it was really just a neo mythic interpretation. what these these comics were. But I sort of left comic books as I got older, and really got into stuff like the Joseph Campbell stuff and the Power of Myth, and the Lord of the Rings and the fantasy literature, and then of course the classics, and really sort of got into the whole Jungian archetype aspect of mythology, and actually, ironically, that of course made me love comics that much more, because as comics evolved and got more adult and dealt with more adult themes and became just more accessible to a larger audience. I think also that sort of as we grew up with comics, that happened. It just made me love the genre even more. And again, I'm just a huge mythology buff, so it's been a real journey.
I guess Peter Parker can grow up after all.
Well, it's interesting, if I can jump in for a second. This is a point where Chris and I meet, and it was probably one of the reasons why there was such a good synergy on this show. I was first introduced to Hero of a Thousand Faces, which is Joseph Campbell's seminal work, in 1972 or 73 by a good friend of mine, Henry Kaiser III. We were crossing campus, and he said, because Henry is this kind of a guy, he said, John, you should read this book. It's great. Boom. And he handed it to me. And that was when I found out that Joseph Campbell existed and what it was all about, the whole concept of the monomyth. That was very much a part of the series, the 65 half hours. I looked at it as one giant mythological voyage. And if the series has any, if it resonates at all with people in this day and age, I think that that's one of the reasons why. So the fact that Chris also kind of tuned into this, I think it really speaks to the core of just the backbone, the strength of the series in terms of why it has lasted so long.
Yeah, the series had an arc. That's one of the things people mention to me when they talk about the show, is that the show was not just sort of a cartoony snippet, a weekly cartoony snippet. This was high fantasy. This was deep myth, and it was connected, and the stories had context and relevance, and the characters changed and evolved, and that's one of the things that seems to have been the appeal, is that people felt that they were immersed in this world, which had meaning, and it wasn't just sort of this week on. It was part of a whole reality, and again, I think that's what John was talking about in that creating that backbone, because it really was a secondary reality that people could immerse themselves in, which people could immerse themselves.
Nothing drives me crazier than starting a lot of these shows today, and most of these series are like the first 20 minutes of a really good movie, and then they just continue ad infinitum, and the problem is they really don't have an ending in sight, and the thing that I really hate is when all the original writers leave the show and a whole bunch of new writers come in, and so you realize that wherever the show was headed in the beginning, everything has now changed. And I always feel that ultimately that kind of leaves you with the feeling that you've wasted your time. You don't hear a lot of people talking about how much they enjoy Lost reruns. And that's because I think that by the time that show ended, it really had lost its way. And so even though it was a very strong show, ultimately you were kind of left with the feeling of, well, where did that really go? Spider-Man really had a very definite voyage, and for all of the frustration that the ending causes for people, and causes for me, I have to look at lists online, the top 10 shows that ended without an ending. Well, in fact, it did have an ending, which was you started out with a very insecure guy, Peter Parker, and by the end of the show, he is so sure of himself that he turns to his creator, Stan Lee, and says, well, Stan, I'm not the guy you created anymore because I like myself now. I just saved all of reality. And I did that by digging deeply into myself and realizing how strong I was and what I had going for me. And so I like myself now.
Talk about the hero's journey.
Yeah, that's the hero's journey. That's the end of it. So this whole business of, why didn't he get Mary Jane? I realized that from a 12-year-old level or a 9-year-old level, I should have done that. But in terms of the epic hero's journey that I was telling, it's got an ending, and the ending is exactly what it should be.
Well, don't sell short the 30-somethings that still want to know the ending. We'll talk about that in a little bit, but I'd like to go back to the very beginning from the ending and ask you guys a little bit more about this audition process for this role. John, I'd love to know, when you were looking for someone to be your Peter Parker and your Spider-Man, what qualities were you looking for this role?
He had to come in at a certain salary range. No, just kidding. No, I had absolutely nothing to do with the casting. I'm incredibly verbose when it comes to things that I had something to do with, and I am extremely honest about the things I had nothing to do with. That was not my domain. I was in the middle of script writing. We were under horrible deadline pressure, and the show was kind of a mess at the beginning politically. So I was busy writing scripts, and the casting was in the hands of... I think our casting guy was Ralph Sanchez, and Bob Richardson was weighing in, and the network was weighing in, and all those people that deal with all those things. I'm sure Stan had a say in it as well. I heard tapes. I don't know how people were plucked out from auditions. I was not there for auditions, and so Chris was just kind of a wonderful surprise when I arrived in the recording booth for the first show. There he was, and people like Ed Asner and Saratoga Ballantyne, and I really didn't have any say in the matter.
So, Chris, what do you remember about this whole process, auditioning and getting the part? Were you hesitant to take it? Just talk me through your emotions of getting this role.
Well, I was thrilled to have the opportunity to audition for Spider-Man. When I first heard about it, I mean, this was incredible to me. I mean, I loved Spider-Man. I was a huge fan. So when they said that they were doing a Spider-Man series and they wanted me to audition for Spider-Man, I mean, I was just over the moon. I couldn't believe it. So, again, I had been reading the comic my whole life, and when I actually went into the booth to audition, I was reading the material, and as I would read the material, and then I was closing my eyes, and I was visualizing the comic. And I was visualizing, frames from the comics I had read, and I would match one of the lines on the script to an image from a comic, and I would think, well, okay, if he's saying that, this is probably what's happening. And so I would create this sort of storyboard in my mind just from having read the comic my whole life, and then I would match the storyboard to the dialogue, and then just sort of go from there. And then once you do that as an actor, once you have words and images, then the body language comes out, and you start to, he's probably swinging in this manner, and, his body's probably in this position. And of course, looking back, I realized that was because I had been so indoctrinated into the Spider-Man myth that I was able to just sort of dive right in. And probably not a lot of the other actors were doing that because they weren't such fanatic fans. And so it just kind of all came tumbling out, and I loved it. And again, as we've seen the Spider-Man myth evolve through time, and we've seen all these different actors, you are sort of you're the current avatar of a Marvel deity, and I always look at it that way. I take it that seriously. And boy, when you don't take it seriously, the fans know, they can feel it, and they will eviscerate you online. I mean, they will tell you that they don't like you. And I've been very fortunate in that I've had a lot of positive feedback. And I think it's because they sensed that I was as into it as they are. Like, I took it as seriously. I love the character. And I think maybe that's one of the reasons that I've stayed with the character, for 20 plus years. Maybe not. Maybe I'm just reading into that. But that's sort of the way I feel about it. And it's just a real honor to be a part of the process at all.
No, I said this in an earlier interview. There is no finer voiceover actor than Chris Barnes. Chris is really, really, really good. And there would be things that he would do that would just amaze me. And to be able to do them at a very young age was astonishing. So, what you just got was the interior workings of a really genius voiceover actor. We were very lucky to have Chris be the lead in this series, because he did bring an honesty and an intensity to the role that I think really made the animation work. Well,
there's a lot of enthusiasm in your voice, and I wanted to ask you about this, John. the pace of your series, it's so rapid fire fast. I watched through the first two seasons this past week to prepare for this, and it's like just it bombarding you, and that and in a great way. I mean, especially for a young ADD mind like my own. But I can hardly think of an animated series whose primary actions move so quickly, and I'm sure that meant tons of different animation cells and mountains of voice acting and longer scripts than typical. John, can you speak to the decision to have your show operate this way, and I guess how it affected the content of the show? And then I guess following that up, Chris, can you speak, I mean, your enthusiasm comes through, but can you speak to how this pacing affected you as a performer?
Sure, I'll jump in. The pacing was an experiment, and it was my experiment. I don't think anybody quite anticipated that I was going to do this. I had been, this is weird. I'll try to tell a short version. I fell in love with a milk commercial where there was a guy who was obviously what we called at that time a yuppie, and he was firing somebody over his portable phone. I don't think there were cell phones. It was a portable phone. And he was so happy that he had done that he started laughing. And he started crossing the street without paying any attention, and a bus hit him. And he ended up in heaven, or we thought. And there was just a giant plate of cookies, chocolate cookies. And he started eating the chocolate cookies, and even he was kind of surprised that he had ended up in what appeared to be heaven. So he's eating the chocolate cookies, and then he went to a refrigerator, and he saw that there was milk inside, and he went to grab the cartons, and they were all empty. So he had no milk. And therefore, this was not heaven, this was hell.
Tom, can I make a suggestion? You're fired!
Welcome to eternity.
Heaven! Yes. Now, wait a minute. Where am I?
Got milk.
It's perfect.
Now, this entire story was told in 1 minute. And I thought to myself, and I would say to my writers, you got to look at that milk commercial. It was on the air that particular year, the year we started. I said, because if they can tell that complicated a story in 1 minute, then we should be able to tell our minutes of Spider-Man should be just as filled with that much information and played out as elegantly as that. So now that's a weird story, but that's really where that came from. I just thought I just want this to be a roller coaster ride. I don't want anyone's attention ever to flag, but I don't want it to be cheap shots, you know, like an explosion here and an explosion there. I look at a lot of animated shows now, and it's just a lot of explosions and a lot of running around and all that kind of stuff. I wanted it to be genuine storytelling, but I wanted the information to be conveyed in a very rapid-fire manner. So that's where that came from. It was just something. It was an experiment that I wanted to try, and I think it worked because I'm rewatching season 1 right now, and it's breathtaking. It takes your breath away. And I can watch it now without even remembering that I had anything to do with it. It's sort of like it's been so many years that it's all new to me in a way. I think it worked, and that's where that came from. It was really just something that I wanted to experiment with. The other thing is, as you can already tell, I love words. I think that there's an elegance to conversation and speaking. Probably my ideal medium should be radio drama. Because I really love words, and I love writing words, and I love writing characters, and I love characters expressing themselves through words. So there's an awful lot of that. I never handed in a short script. We more often than not, we would cut the scripts, before things went to air, especially when Bob decided that he wanted to put recaps into everything or flashbacks into everything. So we'd lose a minute right there in a lot of the scripts. And then also I had this wonderful cast to play with, and I had a superhero whose mouth was covered. So when we would get the film in and I would see how things were playing, I would often have the option to change dialogue. And Chris will remember this, we would often do ADR, not ADR, but we would often record extra lines after the fact, and I could finesse things a little bit better. So anyway, I hope that answers your question.
Sure. So, Chris, how did this affect you as an actor and your performance?
Well, I think that one of the things about Spider-Man that's interesting is that Spider-Man's not an action hero; he's a processing hero. In other words, it's not what he's doing; it's what he's experiencing. And Spider-Man has such an internal. He's always thinking. He's always processing. He's always exploring. And the fact that he's doing this while all these other, quote, action scenes are taking place is, I think, one of the endearing qualities to the character. So it's like John was saying, there's such an emphasis on things blowing up and action taking place that there's not as much of an emphasis on the experiencing or the processing. And Spider-Man seems to epitomize that. Yeah. He's always, even in the new film, even the great job that Holland does is, the funny quips, but you have a metal arm. He's making these really offhanded comments because he's always seeing things. And that's sort of the vitality of youth. And again, that's sort of the young hero. And that's so refreshing and interesting. So the pace of it made total sense to me as an actor because I just saw that as a reflection of the character. So we were doing all of these things in this rapid fire sequence, but it was more about processing and experiencing than it was just about action. So it actually helped me as an actor, and it made sense to me.
Let me give you an example, Dan. In the beginning, I had to decide whether or not there was going to be an interior monologue for the character. And I looked at the comic books. There was one particular comic book I opened up where it was something like 3 pages of nothing but solid interior thought bubbles. And that made that decision easy. Yes, we would do an interior monologue. But then I did something daring in the pilot, which I had no idea whether it was going to work or not. There's this amazing fight sequence underwater where the Lizard and Spider-Man are battling for the control of the neogenic recombinator. And it's like action-packed, and the music's going crazy and everything, and they're down there grappling with each other. Now, in a regular cartoon show, that would be loud music, and no dialogue whatsoever. And I thought, let's not do the normal thing. Let's do something very strange. And so I wrote this monologue, this interior monologue for Chris, where right at the heart of the battle, he says in a very soft voice, "Strange, so strange. This man used to be my mentor, my friend, and now here I am fighting with him." You don't do that in a cartoon show. I'm amazed they let me get away with it.
Strange, so strange. A week ago, this creature was a scientist. My teacher, my friend. He cared for people and wanted to help them just as I do. And now look at the both of us, fighting each other, fighting for our lives.
But that's the kind of thing that we would do on Spider-Man that I think really set it apart, and in a way ran as a counterbalance to that pacing that you were just talking, that rapid-fire pacing. There would be these moments where the character would just stop and think about what was going on and philosophize a little bit. My other favorite moment is when he's on the bridge right after Mary Jane Watson dies. He thinks she's died, and she had just fallen off. It was the end of Turning Point. And I have him standing on the bridge, and I wrote a soliloquy.
So long now, I've tried to be there for everyone, tried to live up to the responsibility that comes with this great power. But when push came to shove, I failed the people who needed me most. The woman I love is gone forever.
It was practically alas, poor Yorick. I knew him well. It's this long, I've tried to help people, but I end up hurting them, the ones I love the most. It's literally like 45 seconds of pure dialogue. That's, for me, that was the bliss of this show, is that I could experiment with that kind of thing.
I love this processing, not action That's the most elegant way I've ever heard that expressed. I'm going to definitely be using that. Thank you. That's,
hey, man, well, my pleasure, man. That's how I feel about it. I'm glad you dug it.
No, that's really wonderful. So, Chris, I've always loved the the edginess you brought to your voice work when performing as Spider-Man, and the kind of soft warmth you brought to Peter. He's very affectionate towards everybody, and the distinction isn't quite as different as, say, Kevin Conroy's different performances as Batman and Bruce Wayne. But you can always tell which personality is dominant any time. I've always felt, whether it be Peter or Spider-Man. Can you talk about creating these two distinct personalities and what it was like performing both of them?
Yeah, I think that, again, was sort of an organic experience, having evolved out of my love of the comic, because it seemed like, again, just the whole concept of wearing a mask. And, again, as John was saying, the mouthless mask. So there's almost symbolism there that the Peter mode and sort of what he talks about, and especially the interaction with Aunt May and Mary Jane and Gwen. This, as you say, there's this warmth and there's this humanity and there's a vulnerability, which I think lends itself to that, to the essence of that character, that expression of that character, and that part of his nature. But when the suit goes on, it's a whole different experience. It's this persona, it's this archetype which is now drawn over the personality of that sensitive individual, which now needs to be a projection of strength and will and determination in order to protect and defend that sensitive life. So again, now we're going into sort of the archetypal warrior. So what I love about Spider-Man is that he's in conflict. He really is the philosopher warrior. He's in conflict. He's coming of age, and he needs to fight for what is right, because what is right is what is vulnerable and beautiful in human nature. And again, that may be me just way, reading too much into it, but that's just kind of the way I feel about it. That's the way I always thought about it. So in terms of creating that dynamic, it was just that warrior mode, defending the vulnerable, sensitive, what is best in life, what makes life worth living, but yet you need to also defend it from the forces of life and psychology and sociology and nature and people that are out of balance with that, or that are out of accord with that, and that's really the hero's struggle.
I'm curious what the moving away from philosophy, what the actual room of the recording booth was like for both as a writer and as a performer. I'm curious about the physical reality of it. Did you guys record multiple actors at the same time? Did you do rewrites while recording? How did that work out for you?
As a performer, that was one of the best things about this show, is that we were all together. It was like an old radio drama. It was like an old radio show. So we were all in the booth together. We were all in next to each other with our stands and our scripts next to each other. We were doing these sequences and these scenes and interacting with each other. And so just from a performance level, again, it was like this wonderful stage production, this radio show where we were all there. I remember doing a scene with Mark Hamill as the Hobgoblin. Yeah. Let me tell you something. That would not be the same without that cat next to you in the room. Because let me tell you, let me tell you, that takes your performance to another level. Of course, to me, it was Luke Skywalker. But he comes in, and all of a sudden, I look over at this guy, and the veins bulging out of his head, and he's got the crazy gleam in his eye. And of course, then all of a sudden, I'm Spider-Man next to the Hobgoblin. It was awesome, and it was like that with these various performers and scenes and the interaction. So it was this really interactive experience that brought the whole thing to life.
Yeah. We would usually get together. We'd start at 2 early o'clock in the morning. And so we'd all be a little bleary-eyed and we'd have donuts and whatnot out in the green room. And I think those green room gatherings were a huge part of the bonding process for everybody, just getting very comfortable with one another. And then we'd go into the recording studio. Bob was there, I was there, Tony Pastor, our director, was there. Sometimes Ralph was there. And really as much of the cast as we could get a hold of to be there. And that was usually everybody. So there would be this wonderful synergy going on inside the recording booth, but then also the green room was fantastic. I mean, finding myself in the middle of conversations between Ed Asner, Ephraim Zimbalist Jr., and David Warner, while they were all trying to top each other with stories of performing Shakespeare. It doesn't get any better than that. Sometimes I wanted to be in the green room more than I wanted to be in the booth. But it was a wonderful experience because everybody really, we all knew we were doing something special. And it was at the very dawn of getting really great actors, famous actors, to come and be a part of cartoon shows. So people that came in and out were people like, Rue McClanahan, Edward Mulhare. Good grief, we had so many of them, the names of which escape me right at the moment, but they're all here alive in my head. But it was just Jeff Corey, just all these people who had wonderful histories, and they brought that into the booth with them. It was a very exciting experience. That, for me, was the most exciting part of doing this show.
And how long would it take to record a typical episode?
I'd say about 4 hours. Chris, what do you think?
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah, it's about 4 hours. Basically, what would happen would be we'd start with the script, and then Tony would say, "Yeah, you need to bite me," and then we'd go back and start again. And each line was done probably about 3 or 4 times. Tony was wonderful, and he was really meticulous about that stuff. If Bob heard something that wasn't quite right, we'd fix it. If I heard something that wasn't right, we'd fix it. If an actor was having a problem with a line or something wasn't quite making sense, I'd be there to change it. So it was a long process, for a 22-minute piece to be in there for 4 hours. Obviously, you're really working hard. One of the, if I might segue to War of the Rocketmen for a second, one of the perks of War of the Rocketmen, which I think actually is the best perk, for $25, you're going to get, among a whole bunch of other things, you're going to get this virtual ticket to this online streaming little film festival that I'm going to put together. I discovered that I have something like 3 hours of footage of us in the recording booth. Chris, did you know this?
No, I didn't know this. What?
I have 3 hours.
That's awesome.
I had a home video I had a high 8mm camera, and I think originally an 8mm video camera, and I brought it into the booth. I brought it into the booth at the very beginning.
Oh, my goodness.
And I brought it into the booth for the very last episode with Stan and Joan and Stanley and Joan Lee and Brian Keith. And so I filmed this stuff. I never looked at it. I put it in a box. I dug it out about a year ago, and I started looking at it, and I was shocked at how much footage I had of us in the booth.
I got to see that.
Yeah, it's great. It's you just doing your Spider-Man thing. Linda Gary, before she passed away, may she rest in peace.
Goodness.
It's great stuff, and I was surprised because I remembered recording the last day, and I thought, okay, I know I've got about 45 minutes, maybe an hour of footage. I have probably over 3 hours of footage of us recording. So a lot of this stuff is going to be part of the Spider-Man Behind the Scenes Film Festival, and I'm going to also throw in some other stuff, a lot of surprises. So for me, that's like the greatest perk of all that we're offering. I forget about the books and the cells and all that kind of stuff. Just to look at that, I still haven't looked at all the footage, so I'm looking forward to seeing it all the way through. And then, Dan, you'll get a really good idea of what it was like doing recording a Spider-Man. I'm just going to run it nonstop, and you'll get to see probably an entire recording session.
That sounds like a lot of fun. I got to ask, were there any lines that just became an inside joke or things you just couldn't? I'm sure with all of the recording, there must have been some things that build up. Anything you can say that is PG or PG-13?
Yeah, well, we were a very clean group, so there wouldn't be anything out of line. The only thing I can remember was how the girls, Jennifer and Saratoga Ballantyne, who was the voice of Mary Jane Watson, Jennifer Hale, the voice of Felicia Hardy, they used to request that Nick Jameson just say the word Felicia.
That's right.
They loved that. They would swoon. They would say it, Nick, say it. Felicia. So anyway,
funny.
that's what I remember.
Chris?
I can't top that.
One more question about recording, the actual recordings. It's common in animated television shows that voice actors often take on numerous roles in the cast. Chris, did you ever portray another character in the series, like just a one-line character or anything? And John, did you ever get to make a voice debut?
Mm-hmm. Chris, I'll let you go first.
I believe I did, and I believe it was a pilot. I think it was in one episode there was a pilot flying over. He was like a fighter pilot, and I think that was the only other character I think I played, and it was just one line. Do you remember that, John?
I have no memory of that whatsoever.
I think that's what it was.
Nor did I have any memory of my one line until there's a young fellow named Tim Barker whom I call the unofficial Spider-Man historian. And he has a site called Spider-Man, the animated series is awesome, or something like that. It's a Facebook page. And he asked me about it, and suddenly I remembered I have a line in Day of the Chameleon where after Spider-Man rescues some window washers who are on a platform falling as a result of a helicopter crash, after he brings them down and lands, there's a crowd that is gathered around, and there's a guy who says, "Way to go, Spider-Man!" and that's
just
me.
Like that.
Just like that. That's exactly what he sounds like.
Way to go, Spider-Man!
I don't know that I would have picked up that was you.
Yeah, no one would. I forgot. I completely forgot that it was me. So there you go.
Speaking of strange voices, I have to ask this about the villains in this show, that none of them seem to be from America, despite being New York villains like the Kingpin. They're all have these European accents. So where did that come from? Was it just that Europeans sound arch?
All good villains are British.
Yeah, there you go. The villains are classy. The villains have class, so they can't be Americans. I don't know. I was really surprised when Doc Ock showed up and Ephraim was doing a German accent. I had never imagined that when I looked at the character. So that was a surprise. Because I didn't do casting, I'd show up in the booth, and it was all just a wonderful surprise to me. So I don't quite know how that happened, really.
Yeah, I know. It's just something that always sticks out to me, that the Kingpin sounds like, I can't put my finger on it, but it's like Russian, maybe?
Yeah. Well, that was Roscoe's voice. Roscoe always talked like this. That kind of thing.
Roscoe was awesome. He had a great voice.
He was wonderful.
Well, Chris, how do you think your voice changed in your years on the show, or maybe even your approach to the character?
Well, I don't think my voice changed that much. It was only over the course of a few years. I was in my early 20s, but I think it changed in the sense of the character changing. That sort of that story arc that John was alluding to earlier about going from the sort of young, insecure hero to the wizened, sort of more mature, experienced, confident hero. So I think there may have been subtle changes over the course of the show in that regard. But again, that's a very subtle arc within the character. But that would probably be the only changes that took place, I would say.
Well, how about that incredible job Chris did? And I was talking about this morning in another interview. The amazing job Chris did in the multiverse episodes, which, by the way, I invented the multiverse. The time when there were all the Spider-Men together, and each one had a different personality. So Chris isn't doing a voice; he's doing an attitude change. He's doing a personality change.
Yeah, that was fun.
And he's doing lines with himself. And there's an arrogant Spider-Man, and there's a meek Spider-Man who doesn't have any real power. And there's, this one and that one. And Chris, I'm in the booth listening to it, watching him do this. And I could hear the distinct personalities. That, to me, was, what made Chris stand out in my mind and makes him stand out in my mind as one of the best voiceover actors I've ever encountered.
Oh, that's very, very kind of you to say, John. I really appreciate that. But that was a great opportunity to sort of flex some voiceover muscle and really just indulge in the process, because these characters were so interesting. I mean, it was the same character and yet not at all. So it was the same voice, but as you said, very different attitudes. And I remember doing that. I remember how much fun we had with that, because I'd have to maintain this thread. It was like these multiple threads. Well, this guy's this way, and this guy's this way, and this one's this way. And then as they began to interact, I'd sort of jump back and forth these different frequencies of
Right.
characters.
You had to have conversations with yourself,
Yeah.
Which just amazed me. Just amazed me that you could do that.
I still have conversations with myself.
Well, so would just Peter Parker on his own,
Yes.
whether his internal monologue or what. But Spider Knight has always been a favorite of mine. So thank you for that wonderful creation. You said you flexing your voiceover muscles, but I'm curious about how much you brought to the role physically in the recording studio, because I know some actors really like to put their all into it. What's it like for you?
Well, it's funny. We were talking about this earlier, that when we were initially recording in the beginning, we kept having a problem with the microphone, that I kept going off mic. Like the sound was not right when I would transition from Peter Parker to Spider-Man. And they couldn't figure out what was wrong with the microphone, and so they were kind of getting irritated with the engineer. And then somebody pointed out, I don't remember who it was, but they pointed out that when I was talking in the voice of Peter Parker, I was standing in one particular way. And then when I would start doing Spider-Man, my whole body would change. I would crouch down. I would start doing all these really, so I was all over the place. And then somebody looked up and said, well, he's dipping down below the mic. He's, crouching in this position. And it wasn't dramatic, but it was subtle enough so that it was causing this sound problem. And it's just sort of a reflection of the physicality of the role, because, and I would also close my eyes a lot when I was doing the dialogue. I would look at the script, I would memorize the line, and then I would close my eyes, I would imagine the scene, I would see it in my head, and then I would do the dialogue. And again, you're sort of acting it out to some degree in your mind, but your body follows. And so that was a really interesting aspect of the physicality of the role, which was a lot of fun.
I actually have some still pictures of Chris doing this that I shot at the time. We were so disturbed by that change of microphone position that we were thinking of replacing him with Brock Peters. But fortunately, we changed our minds.
Well, how did you solve that? Did you force yourself to aim towards the microphone more specifically, or?
It's a trick I still use to this day. What I would do is it sounds silly. I will widen my stance so that my feet are more than shoulders width apart. And when I do my crouch, it's not. That's my talking voice. So if I was doing Peter or something, I would have my stance wider. And then when I would go into Spidey, I'd bring my legs together and crouch. So I'm still in the same position relative to the microphone, but my body posture changes.
I think you ought to go to some gyms and sell this exercise. As, there's that nerd gym in L.A. I think they'd pick up on this.
It was just one of those funny tricks I learned. I said, well, how can I keep my face in the same position relative to the mic? I said, okay, well, when I'm doing Peter's dialogue, I'll just spread my stance out wider, and that way I sort of have this very passive, gentle. And then when I'm Spidey, I'll change bring my feet together and almost like a karate stance, and then crouch down, but it would all end up being in the same place. It was very funny. It worked out, and it was great.
Hey, John, I wanted to ask you. I was watching it. Like I said, I was watching the first 2 seasons of the show, and I was thinking, I can't think of another children's show that portrayed the hero as having multiple love interests. And in this case, Mary Jane and Felicia Hardy. Was there any pushback to Peter? And I apologize for this pun. Being swinging and single.
That's a good question, Dan. Well, first of all, there was pushback to everything I wanted to do in the first season, and it was just a complete uphill battle. So I'm sure there was, because I simply said I wanted to do it. If I said I want this to be red, somebody, it can't be red. We don't think red will work. It won't work. You're crazy and stupid. And there was a lot of that in the first season. Some of it, though, just kind of happened without anybody really paying attention. The way I work is sometimes if I'm getting a lot of flack, I sort of just pretend to be real stupid and stuff is just happening. It's like I'm not really controlling it, but I am. So some of that just slipped in. I do remember once, see, this is a perfect example of what I'm saying. When I wrote the pilot, I put Deborah Whitman in it, and I put Deborah Whitman in it because I didn't know what I wanted to do with Mary Jane or whether I wanted to have Gwen or, I had no idea what I was going to do. And certainly Felicia wasn't a character that I don't even think I was aware of yet. So to avoid the thing altogether, I plucked this obscure character out of the comics, Deborah Whitman, and I just said, okay, she's going to be the girl in it because I just can't decide all this other stuff. We had to get the pilot going. So the pilot got going. Deborah Whitman's in it. And when we were at a convention, a comic book convention here in L.A., that clip, we had prepared that clip where Peter first sees the lizard in the lab and chases after him, jumps on the windowsill, is about to change to Spider-Man, and Deborah says, "Peter, don't leave me." And so we had that clip. And at the end of that clip, Deborah kind of looks up to him and says, "Well, that was pretty brave of you, Peter," kind of with a little gleam in her eye. And Stan came to me afterwards, and I think that was the first time that he realized that there was any kind of indication of maybe like a love thing going on. And he said to me, and he went into this whole tirade about how Peter only loves Mary Jane. It's Peter and Mary Jane. It's no one else. I really think it's a problem that girl looks like she's in love with Peter because it's Peter and Mary. And he really was very worked up about it. Excelsior. And I think that was the first time he noticed that anything was going on that wasn't just Peter and Mary Jane. But, I had grown up with the books, and I knew that there was that element of Spider-Man that was very important. Which girlfriend was he going to end up with? That was a huge reason why I read the comic book when I was a kid. So it was very important to me that all of that had to be in there. I had mapped out a whole soap opera arc for the first season, and I started it with Spider Slayers, the first Spider Slayers episode, which I only just watched a couple of days ago. And right after that episode was done, the edict came down that there would be no continuing storylines, period. And if I had any notion of doing anything like that, I was to stop immediately, and which of course would kill all of that sort of that soap opera stuff. And so that's why after that we just sort of did the single episodes, Venom being an exception and Hobgoblin being an exception, but the rest of them are all standalone episodes. And then in the second season, when the show finally got on the air and was a hit, everybody kind of relaxed, and it was no longer the new toy, so they weren't really paying attention. And then I just started up the soap opera again. And that, that was really important to me to do that. So, yes, there probably was pushback. That's the short answer.
You mentioned all the soap opera. There was no time more so in the comic book series that the book was, Betty and Veronica back and forth than during Stanley and John Romita Sr.'s time on the series. And your show, watching it through, not only did I find some spelling errors, which I'm sure you're aware of, like museum in the first season. Have you seen this?
No.
And it spelled M-U-S-C-U-M in one of the newspapers. But on one of the newspapers, there's a little writing that says, article written by Ned Leeds. And I'm curious if that's you doing that, and if so, was this Stan Lee, John Romita era your inspiration? I guess what you knew of Spider-Man, did it come from that era?
Yes. Well, it wasn't what I knew of Spider-Man because I started reading Spider-Man within maybe a month or two of it beginning. I just missed purchasing that Amazing Fantasy by probably a month or two.
Oh.
So back in those days, there were no comic book stores, ladies and gentlemen. You either bought the comic on the newsstand or you didn't get the comic, and if you missed it, you missed it. There wasn't, nobody was reselling anything. So I happened to only notice Spider-Man maybe the second or third month in, and that was while traveling the subway on my way to high school. So I was there at the very beginning. I began with Ditko. I loved Ditko. And when Johnny Romita, when Johnny, I just met Johnny Romita Jr. at a DC event, so I should know this. When Johnny Romita took over Spider-Man, quite frankly, that to me was a very important transition that I liked, I preferred. I know that this is blasphemy to a good number of people out there, but for me, the Romita era was when it all just clicked, and that's where you get Turning Point, and that's where you get a lot of the issues that really worked for me. The writing was really sharp, and I saw the series, and I think Bob did too, in the design, as very much being that era, and that being our inspiration. As far as the newspaper was concerned, I actually have all my books of artwork of all the prop designs and everything. Those were designed by people, artists on staff. We designed every prop. So anytime anybody handled a prop, that had to be designed by an artist. And all of that material would get sent overseas, and that's what they used as a basis for it. So those newspapers, I actually have the model sheets for those newspapers. And probably those were artists who really were into Spider-Man, who knew that they should do that, put a byline by Ned Leeds. And I think Ned Leeds did eventually turn up in our series briefly. I think Bobby Bergen did his voice. I'm not sure. But at any rate, that's where that came from. So probably the artist designing that prop was the one that put that in there. As far as the misspelling is concerned, I'm so used to that because I've been in animation already. By the time I did Spider-Man, I'd been in animation for about 10 years. And everything gets sent overseas, and they don't know what they're writing. It's not their language, And if you've got something being animated in China or Korea, and in fact most of the animation is done in Korea, they have no idea what they're writing. So they were always doing stuff like that. And after a while, I just stopped noticing it. I remember years ago in a Scooby-Doo, I had written Pingree's Department Store, which was where everything was taking place, and that was named after a friend of mine. I always put my friends' names and things, and it came back Pidigree's Department Store, P-I-D-I instead of P-I-N-G. So I probably saw that and just paid no attention to it. I'm so used to it.
That's funny. Okay, so last question about the audio in this series, which seems to be the focus of this conversation. The music in this show, I think you can't watch this show and not notice the music because it's so memorable with that beautiful orchestral score that, I put it in the previous interview that we did as like to break up the conversation. I just couldn't help myself but listen to the 20-minute score because it's so wonderful. And I'm curious, did you have any role in assembling the people to put together this score? What can you tell me about the score and the theme song?
I wrote all that music.
Ah, of course.
And I sang it. That's Spider-Man Radioactive. All I can tell you is that we know Haim Saban from all the amazing TV shows that he's done, and I think now he owns the world. But the way that he got into the business was, if I'm not mistaken, because there were a few people that got into the business this way, Haim had these wonderful connections in Israel where for a relatively small amount of money you could get like the Israeli Symphony Orchestra or some amazing symphony orchestra to do the music for things. And I think the way that a lot of this would work would be that if you did it in Israel, it was a fraction of what it would cost to do it in this country. And then you'd sort of offer it to production entities in this country at a bargain price, and you'd own the music so that when it came time for residuals to come in, you could actually make a fairly hefty amount of money off of the residuals. Has anyone ever explained this to either of you guys, how this worked?
Sure.
I never knew any of this.
Yeah, this is sort of one of those little animation things that where a lot of people were making a lot of money, I think, off of music rights. That's why every bit of music that ever came out of Hanna-Barbera was quote unquote written by Bill Hanna and Joe Barbera. What that means is that they had nothing to do with writing it, but they got all the residuals.
That's the way to do it.
Oh, listen, there were so many. There's one side of animation, especially in the 80s, that was always quite wonderful, but then there was another side where it was basically Mos Eisley's spaceport, and people had all kinds of ways of earning cash, and I think that was kind of an offshoot of that. I think that what happened was, because I believe that Haim was involved in the music, was that they just had a wonderful deal on that where we could get these fantastic musicians and this brilliantly composed music for a relatively small amount of money compared to what it would have cost for us to do it. Now, having said that, I don't think they skimped on any aspect of Spider-Man. In fact, it was a win-win situation because not only was it affordable, but it was brilliant. So the great thing about the first episode of Spider-Man is that that's an entirely original score that was scored to that episode. And you never get that on Saturday morning.
No.
Generally on Saturday morning, what you get is somebody provides you with a whole library of music, and then you just use those music cues over and over and over again. But Night of the Lizard, that score from beginning to end was scored specifically to that episode. And that's why that episode seems so lush and wonderful and expensive. And I mean, it's like watching a movie. And that's part of the reason that happens. So again, sorry for the long answer, but it's an interesting subject.
Chris, I promise I haven't forgotten about you.
No, I'm fascinated listening to this stuff. I didn't know that.
So, Chris, you had famously returned to the character of Spider-Man almost 20 years later, but I was curious, in the time after the show's ending and I guess your current work on the character, what had the show become for you? What role in your life did it occupy in those years?
Well, it's funny because the show kind of went away but it never really went away. It always seemed to be around. But it was a wonderful experience that I had as a young man, as a young actor. And as I moved on to other things, it was something I did in the past and I loved. But it wasn't until, as I said, that generation sort of came to adulthood that it was sort of like the seeds blossomed. It was, you didn't really understand the until the harvest came in. And I noticed that there was this whole generation that was deeply affected by the show. And so during the time of the planting and the time of the harvesting, it was just sort of, the shoots were sprouting and things were growing, but it was sort of under the radar. But then all of a sudden there was this tremendous resurgence of interest and appreciation for the show. So the time that I did it was wonderful and I loved it. And then I had fond memories of it during the subsequent years. And then all of a sudden there was this surge of new interest and appreciation for this show as this whole generation became more aware of how it had affected them. And so there was sort of three separate stages to this whole process. So it's been interesting to watch that, and I think that's one of the reasons that they asked me to come back for other Spider-Men. I think the first one was Spider-Man Noir in Shattered Dimensions, and when they approached me, I said, "Well, gee," I said, I'm 20 years older now. I'm not the same Spider-Man." I go, "But I'm flattered, but does that make sense? Is it true to the character? Is it going to sound pretentious or fake? Or, I was really not quite sure about that." But then they explained to me, well, Spider-Man Noir is a very different type of Spider-Man. It's a different universe. He's older, he's darker. And I said, so he's me. I said, so.
No, you were pretty dark. You were pretty dark when you were young, Chris.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's gotten worse, John. So I thought, well, that's interesting. I can do that. And And then when I read the character and looked at the context of the character, I really appreciated it. I really gravitated towards that character. And again, people really responded to it, again, because I was bringing a sort of a new, it was a new take to a new interpretation on the myth and an expansion of the myth, which just so happened to correlate with my nature and the performance that I could bring to the character. And I loved it, and people seemed to enjoy it, and it was fantastic, and then it sort of snowballed from there to in Ultimate Spider-Man, the latest series with Drake Bell. I started playing villains. I started playing Electro in that. I played this wonderful character called the Wolf Spider, which is again, we're doing more multidimensional stuff, which is really interesting. Which of course John pioneered, and Spider Knight on USM. So. And I was doing that thinking, gee, this brings back memories of me having to play multiple Spider characters from the series that John had invented. And here they are 20 years later, basically doing the same thing. And I thought, well, that's interesting. And yet now I'm playing villains and other characters. So it was the old saying, die the hero or live long enough to become the villain. And so it was a thrill to have lived long enough to become the villain.
There's nothing more everyman than meeting your multi-dimensional self.
Very true. But it was really interesting doing noir in particular because, as I like to say, there's this wonderful quote from Jung where he says, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." And I think, yeah, isn't that powerful? And I think that's really behind noir, that's behind the symbiote, that's behind Venom. That's what all that stuff is. And so there's this new sort of, expansive aspect of the character, which has been around for a little while, but it's taking on new life. And anyway, it's very interesting to me. So I'm thrilled to be a part of it, of course, as always.
And so they reached out to you to play noir primarily. That was their first inclination for you? Yeah,
I believe that was the first in Shattered Dimensions. And then Edge of Time, they continued on with 2099, and that was the next one that I did.
Well, I'm curious, what do you think are the differences between recording for a television show and recording for a game? I mean, obviously a game you're going to have to fill in a lot of different iterations for all the different choices that the player has, but does that make the recording aspect of it any different for you?
It does, actually. It's interesting because when you're doing a show like Spider-Man, you are telling a story. You are performing a piece of art for the audience. But when you're doing a game, it's a bit of interactive art. And that's a very subtle distinction because every line is in response to something the player does. And I'm a gamer. I love games. And it's really annoying when there's bad voiceover work because it kills the suspension of disbelief. So one thing I always think about when I'm doing a video game is that I'm not just telling a story. I'm interacting in a storytelling experience with the player. And so when I say when I'm doing a lot of lines, I'm talking to the player. And that's a very subtle distinction, but it's very interesting. And I've always made sure that I find out, well, what exactly is happening in this moment? What is the character? What has the player done that's made the character react this way? What has some other character done? How is it? What's actually happening on the screen? Like how? Again, I'm a very visual guy when it comes to the voiceover thing. So I like to know what is happening in gameplay so that there's not a juxtaposition. Because if you're a gamer, you can't stand that awful juxtaposition where the voice doesn't match the action, and there seems to be a disconnect between what you're doing and what the voice is saying. So I always have tried to have a flow so that we're in it together. That's always sort of my mentality when it comes to video games, is that we're in it together because I love games and I know I want to be in it with you. So it's fun so that we're all in it together and it's this co-created experience. But again, maybe I'm sort of reading into it, but that's sort of the way I approach it, and it makes it of value to me. So.
Well, what's it like playing the game and then continuing to have a conversation with yourself? Do you play these games after you complete them?
Do you know what? I've never played a game that I've done as myself. Like I've never, and I know that sounds odd, but I do that intentionally. I don't want to have me responding to me. It's that, you know what I mean? I don't want that. It sounds silly, but I don't want that to corrupt the process. I want to know. I want to feel somebody else playing the character, and then me interacting with them as that avatar of that character. I don't want to bring me into it. If that makes sense.
Now, I did a promo for War of the Rocketmen, though, where Chris is playing an imaginary game
That's right.
made
Yes.
up called
Very funny.
Spider-Man's Online Multiverse.
That's right.
And he and Jennifer Hale are playing their respective characters, and I won't spoil the surprise for you, but that's a promo that your listeners might want to look for.
Spider-Man, watch out for that Spider Slayer.
Whoa! Oh, that missile just missed me.
Let's get that Slayer, Spider.
I'm right behind you, Black Cat.
While you hit it with your webbing, I'll climb up here and smash its control center. There!
Black Cat, look out! It's gonna blow!
We did it! We blew up the Spider Slayer! You are a very effective Spider-Man, Chris Barnes.
Well, Jennifer Hale, you are one heck of a powerful Black Cat. And we make a pretty good team.
But you know, whenever we play Spider-Man's Online Spider-Verse together, I kind of always feel like we're cheating.
What? Why?
Well, you were the voice of Spider-Man in Spider-Man, the animated series, and I was the voice of the Black Cat, so it's like we've already had plenty of practice being superheroes. We kind of have an unfair advantage over all these other online players.
Ah, nonsense. Now, this game has plenty of players better than we are. You know, according to what I've read on the Gamers Message Forum, here on level 14, behind that door, is the most formidable player in this whole massive multiplayer online role-playing game. And we're just about to face him. So, joystick your Black Cat character over to that big red button, have her press it, and prepare to face the greatest player in this entire online game universe.
Okay, here goes. Moving her to the door. Pressing the button. There.
Holy crap! It's a giant, super-duper Mega Spider Slayer with Mega Spider Slayer action!
Look at the size of that thing. And look how big its guns are.
And in that cockpit, is that who I think it is?
Die, you miserable scum! Die! Bow before my power. Feel the wrath of the mighty J. Jonah Jameson!
Ed? Ed Asner, is that you?
Yeah? Who's this?
It's Chris Barnes.
And Jennifer Hale. Hi.
Oh, hi, you guys.
You're the high-scoring terror of Spider-Man's Online Spider-Verse?
Well, yeah. There's nothing I enjoy more than wiping out hordes of idiot superheroes while sitting here in my living room in my underwear.
That's a mental image I could have done without.
Oh, Chris.
Yes, Ed?
This is one adventure where Spider-Man doesn't win in the end. Oh, that felt good.
That's a great promo.
Absolutely. So one of the other big appeals to that Shattered Dimensions game is that it brought in all the voice actors from Spider-Man's history. Do you ever keep up with any of these other Spider-Men, considering you're in a sort of exclusive club of some sort?
You know, it's funny. I've spoken to Josh Keaton because we worked together a little bit. We've communicated a bit on Twitter and just sort of texted back and forth. But no, I don't really keep in touch with the other Spider-Men, the other carriers of the lineage. But it's always a thrill to see new people become a part of that club, so to speak. And it's just I encourage them to take the character as seriously as they can, as hopefully as I tried to take it, and I guess more importantly, take it as seriously as the fans take it. Because again, I go back to this thing that if you don't dig it, if you're not feeling it, the fans can tell, and then you're disrespecting that experience. There's almost a quasi kind of religious experience about like the cosplay and participating in this sort of ritualized mythology that people get into. So if you don't take it seriously, it's offensive to people because they take it seriously, and it's a way that they're expressing these inner archetypes and this inner reality and this inner heroic nature. It's how they access that. So if you take it seriously, man, they love it because you're honoring that experience. And if you're just sort of flippant, and there have been a few people who the fans have made it very clear that they didn't like what the person was doing, I really think that's the root of it. It was just a job. We've all done that. We've all had jobs that were just jobs. Yeah, Spider-Man, not one of them. Right. If you approach it that way, it's not going to work. So again, it's just sort of my 2 cents on it.
It reminds me of when the Lone Ranger movie came out in the 80s, and the first thing the studio did was legally place a hold on Clayton Moore being able to appear as the Lone Ranger anymore. They said, well, we got this new movie, and we don't want you to be the Lone Ranger. You can no longer represent yourself as the Lone Ranger. Well, they immediately alienated every Lone Ranger fan out there, and, of course, the movie was a bomb. So I'm always amazed when people make that mistake, It's a silly mistake to make.
So this show is now 22 years old, and I'm curious for both of you guys, what do you think has changed about, I guess, maybe the culture of animation or the culture of performing as a superhero or doing superhero type of work in the 22 years since you started that series?
What's changed? I don't think the TV shows are as good anymore in animation. I don't think the action-adventure TV shows are as good as they were in the 90s. I don't watch a lot of it, but I watched some of it. I don't watch any Spider-Man shows, mostly because then when people come up to me and say, so-and-so is a better show than yours, it's like I have no opinion. It's, well, if it worked for you, that's great. But, I haven't seen the show. But I have watched 1 or 2 of the Marvel other shows. I guess I watched a couple of episodes of Avengers. And I take it back. I did watch 1 episode of the new Spider-Man show. I watched the pilot because I saw it at a convention at one of the cons. They're not the same. They're not, the storytelling isn't as deep as Batman or X-Men or Spider-Man. I feel a heavy corporate hand. One of the reasons why I want to do War of the Rocketmen is I want to get back to when I did Spider-Man. After a certain point, and really, pretty much after the first 13, creatively I was in control of the show. Now, it wasn't because anybody thought that I was terribly brilliant. Mostly it was because we had deadlines and people just stepped out of the way and said, go get the show done because we're really invested in meeting the deadlines. But I had a huge amount of creative control. And I remember thinking at the time that this was a dinosaur, that this was not going to happen anymore. Now, if you do a Marvel show, you have to answer to Disney, you have to answer to Marvel, you have to answer to, whatever network you're on. And you feel that heavy hand of a committee in everything that they do. And I don't think you can have the kind of creative control anymore that you used to. And I think the way you get a Spider-Man is you turn to one guy and you say, give us your vision. Now, I happen to get lucky. I won that lottery. And again, not because anybody thought that I deserved it, but it just sort of happened that way. Except maybe Stan Lee. Stan thought that I deserved it, but the rest of them really didn't. But I got lucky, so I was able to present a complete vision. And I don't think you get that anymore. I think you just get a lot of explosions and you get a lot of characters running around, and then everybody sits back and says, okay, now we're going to sell some toys. And that's pretty much where it stands.
I would say that I would say at the risk of sounding pedantic, I'll take that risk. There's an emphasis on, or I should put it this way, snippets of scenarios are not stories. I guess that's just the way I'd put it.
Well, I feel that way about a lot of these things now. I think that mentality has bled into the comics, and as the Marvel studio pictures get more successful, I think they're not telling stories anymore. It's like hangout time with characters, and that can be fun but at a certain point you want some kind of depth to it.
Yeah. I almost wasn't the guy to do Spider-Man. You know, they spent the first 13 episodes trying to figure out how to fire me. And I just hung on because I happened to be pretty good politically. And then managed to get, my deal was I was signed on for 13 and then they could get rid of me. And then they had to determine after the first 13 whether or not they were going to keep me for the remainder of the series. At one point during that first 13, I had emptied out my office. I was so fired, it was ridiculous. Chris, you never knew about any of this.
No.
No, I was fired. I was completely fired. I got a call from Stanley's secretary, Pam, who was a friend of mine, and she said, "Do you know what they're doing right now?" And I said, "No, what?" And he said, "They are interviewing your replacement." I even know the name of my replacement. And then I did a little finagling, and I managed to hang on, and I got that taken care of. And then by the time the first 13, by the time the signing arrived, because that was maybe around episode 5, by the time we got to the end of the 13, everybody had calmed down, and I did a little bit of finagling, and I got myself signed on. So, getting these gigs is not easy. Keeping these gigs is not easy, and it has nothing to do with how good you are.
This might be straying from topic, but I'm curious what you guys think about it. It seems a lot of our culture, and you guys go to all these Comic-Cons and stuff, I'm beginning to feel more and more alienated when I go to Comic-Cons as this kind of umbrella widens. And not to say that people shouldn't be welcome into the umbrella, but they become less and less about actual comic books. And the medium that started it. And I'm curious, you're saying, these cartoons are kind of becoming, by committee and maybe a little soulless. So much of our pop culture is nostalgia-driven now. What happens when we don't have nostalgia anymore for anything? What are we going to pull from? Are we going to have to be creative again?
Well, the myths are eternal. They address fundamental questions of the human condition, so they can't go away. They'll be reinvented. They'll be restated. They will be reinvigorated because the human psyche demands it. So if whatever vehicle which is providing that nourishment to the soul becomes corrupted, then it will be discarded in favor of something that does fulfill that human need.
I'm just trying to figure out when it is that Chris Barnes became more eloquent than me.
Well, I'm going to take it to a more base question. Chris, I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but you're currently the only person to specifically be hired to play the superior Spider-Man in any medium. And I'm not sure what kind of information you were given about the character before you did the work for that game, Marvel Heroes. But yeah. I'm curious how your experience was working on that particular role and if you were aware of that significance.
I was not aware of that significance. I've had a great time on that game. We just did. I just posted on my Twitter feed actually. My Twitter feed is very funny. It's Eric Spider Brady. Yeah, at Eric Spider Brady, which I get a kick out of. But I was doing some symbiote Spider-Man, and I'd done some Iron Spider also, which was a lot of fun. But I was not aware that I'm the only one to do Superior Spider. No kidding. Well, that's interesting. Well, there you go. I'm another honor bestowed upon me, which I am thrilled to accept.
Well, another villain for your villain column. So there you go. So you guys are the reason you're here primarily, other than to talk to our awesome fans, is to promote this new project that you're working on, War of the Rocketmen. And I got to be at the WonderCon where it was kind of announced that you guys were all going to try to get the original cast back together to do this new production. And so it's been really fun for me to watch the genesis of this project. And also, like John, weirdly enough, John and I have become friends in the 2 years since since I first interviewed you. Who would have thought that would become a reality?
Yeah, really, no kidding.
Because I was in Maryland at the time and moved to California, and lo and behold, I bump into John every 2 weeks now.
Yeah.
But can you tell us about this project for those who don't know anything about it, and what the excitement is all about?
Well, yeah, what happened with the anniversary was that we all came together and we were in a room together for the first time in 20 years, and we remembered how much we enjoyed one another's company and how much we appreciated one another's talent. And it just felt great. And one or two of us said, gee, wouldn't it be great to work on something again? Now, I know a lot of fans out there would love for us to continue Spider-Man because that's what I hear from you all. The problem is, I don't own Spider-Man. And when I say that, people say, well, then you should go to Marvel and tell them that they should do this, and they should go to Disney and tell them that they should do. I can't tell Disney to do anything. I mentioned earlier today that I went to an event a couple of years ago where there was a major Marvel/Disney executive, and I went right up to him and I said, we have the 20th anniversary of my series coming up, and we really ought to do something. And he looked at me like I was crazy. So, it's hard for fans to believe, but my series to Disney people and to Marvel people is completely irrelevant. So, no, we're not going to be able to continue Spider-Man, the animated series, unfortunately. However, I just happen to be a guy that makes up things out of the clear blue. I develop ideas for other people as well as for myself. And I thought, well, I'm just going to come up with an idea that I can get passionate about and that other people can get passionate about. And I will simply use the cast of Spider-Man, the animated series, which happens to be one of the most talented voice casts out there. So I've always loved the Old Republic serials. There's one character that when you show him to people, everyone goes, oh, I love that character. And that's the Rocketman, sometimes called Commando Cody. He was originally called the Rocketman. Later, he was called Commando Cody when they recut the Old Republic serials and put them on television. And then they also did a Commando Cody serial to accompany the television series. Anyway, it's a guy who straps a rocket on his back and flies, and he has a very, very distinctive helmet. When Dave Stevens, the comic book artist, the legendary comic book artist, the late Dave Stevens, when he wanted to do a Rocketman character, he went to seek the rights to Commando Cody. He couldn't get them, so he invented his own, and he called it the Rocketeer. And I think some of you certainly know and love that character. I'm doing the same thing. I'm taking a Rocketman type of character, and I've created a whole idea around it. It takes place in the 1940s. I've done a trailer where it's very noir-ish, and I've got the cast. Chris is going to be the lead. He's going to be the main character, Skylar King. And I've got Saratoga Ballantyne, Jennifer Hale, Rodney Salisbury, Mr. Ed Asner, Gary Imhoff, who was Harry Osborn in Spider-Man the Animated Series. So it's going to be very 1940s, very noir, takes place during World War II in America. It's flying Rocketmen who are protecting America from flying Nazis. It's a secret war, if I may use that phrase, and it's called War of the Rocketmen, and we are crowdfunding it. And what we're going to do is we're going to put together a presentation. So I'm going to bring all the cast together. We're going to do a soundtrack, and I've got great artists working on this, and we're going to do art. And we're going to put it together into something we call an animatic, and then I'm going to go around and sell it as a TV series. I'm going to try to sell it as a TV series. But in order to do that presentation, I am raising money on Indiegogo. Now, why should Spider-Man fans care about something that isn't Spider-Man? Because I am giving away such amazing stuff as perks. You're going to get actual pencil drawings from Spider-Man the Animated Series. These are actual drawings that were used to do the animation for Spider-Man the Animated Series. I'm not giving these things away. You have to obviously donate in order to get them, but we're going to have Peter Finds Mary Jane. Everyone always asks me, what would you have done if you had had another episode to show Peter getting Mary Jane? Well, I have written that episode. I'm going to make it available to you. So it's a script, just like every episode that we wrote. I'm going to make it available to anyone who donates, actually. If you donate $25 or more, you get Peter Finds Mary Jane. Some of you might want it in hardcover with my autograph. That's going to be, obviously more than the base donation. But we're going to do one of the best perks we're offering. I've got the cast the cast has agreed to do phone messages for people. So you'll get Chris Barnes doing your phone message, hey, everybody, Jim Smith isn't here because he's busy fighting crime with me, You can actually have Spider-Man's voice doing your phone message.
Jim is definitely not Spider-Man.
It's gonna, the perks are great, and as I said earlier, one of the perks will be all this footage that I shot of our original recording sessions. I have over 3 hours of footage. You're gonna have the option to stream that online. It's only going to be available to people who donate, and there are bigger things where you can actually be at the recording session when we record War of the Rocketmen. And who knows, maybe if I gather everyone together and they're amenable to this, and I haven't even bounced this off of Chris, but maybe we'll record Peter Finds Mary Jane. I'll see if I can convince them to do that. So, you might find yourself in a room with us recording something related to Spider-Man, and that's history. So it's a great campaign, and I'm figuring that everybody who's a Spider-Man fan should be involved in supporting this project for that reason. Okay.
One of the things that's great is that the show is. It's important. I think people would really dig it, not just because of the Spider-Man connection, but because the people that love Spider-Man probably all feel this collective longing for something like Spider-Man, with something of the same quality and depth and storyline. And this would be a new generation of that. So they'd not only be connected to Spider-Man, the animated series, in all of those ways that John just talked about, but they'd also be part of creating something new, a new incarnation, which continues that legacy of storytelling. And that's a really fun, exciting new project to be part of. That's one of the reasons I'm so excited to be a part of it, is that there's nothing like it out there. And I think it would fill this need that a lot of people feel, especially people of the generation who grew up watching Spider-Man. They want something like that, and to share even with their kids. And so I think it would be a really just a really great thing to be a part of, just in every way.
And I love that you're going back to these serials.
Yeah.
The appeal of something like Star Wars is that it takes something like Joseph Campbell, Hero of a Thousand Faces, and applies it to this kind of rough storytelling, that used to come before another movie, And there's a charm that's just built into that automatically. And when you give it the AAA stamp, you give it all you've got, it really allows what the heart that was there to really come forward. And I love everything I've seen so far. I'm particularly in love with the Nazis and their design, because
Yes.
they look like Darth Vader with wings, and I'm all about that.
It's also particularly socially relevant too. And people think that Nazism and fascism in general is a thing of the past. Just look around you. Look at what's going on in our world. I mean, it's supremely relevant. Good versus evil is very relevant. It is very modern. It's very current. And I think it'd be great to have a story that reminds us of that.
It's the best of all worlds. It's the best of 90s action-adventure animation, which I don't think you can find anymore except in reruns. It's the best of the serials. It's the best of the whole kind of noir concept of things. But there will be a twist. There will be new ways of looking at things. I've mentioned in the past that the leader of the Rocketmen is actually a woman. And she's a very well-known woman, a very well-known character in history. I'm not going to tell you who she is. But there is a trailer. You can take a look at it. It's very, I think it's very well done. And by that, I'm not complimenting myself. I'm complimenting my artists. I have 3 great artists involved in this project. One is Del Barris, who did all the great promotional artwork for Spider-Man, the animated series, 20 years ago. He and I remain very good friends. My other artist is a brilliant artist named Frank Grau. And Frank is actually the one who designed those Nazi costumes that you like so much, Dan.
I would say that I would buy an image of the Nazi costumes to hang in my house, but I feel like that would raise some serious eyebrows.
Well, let's be honest. The fascists always had the best, sense of style. That's true. They always had the best costumes. Damn them.
That splash of red on the sleeves is, just the best.
It gets back to that classy villain thing.
I hear a good portion of this country in the next year is going to be wearing some of those.
Probably, yes. We might be timely in a whole way that we're not really wanting. Anyway, Frank's done some wonderful work, and he's another artist on this. And also Des Taylor. Des is an artist. I met him on Facebook because I fell immediately in love with his art. So I would urge everybody to Google Des Taylor, Destaylor. He's London-based. We met online. We met face-to-face at the San Diego Comic-Con. He and I hit it off really well. No sooner did he finish the artwork for War of the Rocketmen, which I commissioned, but he then took off as being a TV star in the UK. He hosts his own TV show. He's one of 3 hosts of a TV show that does sort of broadcasting about fandom in the DC universe. So he's really a powerhouse, and I'm very lucky to have him attached and very lucky to know him as a friend. It's a fantastic project, and it's exactly, if you're looking for action-adventure, if you loved Spider-Man, if you love the cast of Spider-Man, if you want to hear Chris Barnes be a hero again, if you want to put these people to work, this is a great project. Oh, and Peter finds Mary Jane. So, yes, I wrote that script. I've done a whole bunch of audio promos, one of which is sort of the beginning of that script, which Chris and Saratoga Ballantyne were involved in. And I also had a wonderful actress by the name of Karen Kaler playing Madam Web. So if you want to hear the beginning of that story, that's our very first audio promo. I've done 4 promos so far. I've probably got about 4 more to go. Some of them are very funny, and they all have the cast of Spider-Man, the animated series, in them. So if you're a fan, you should definitely look for those, and those are free. Those are available on YouTube for you to download or for you to stream. Final thing, website for War of the Rocketmen is www.waroftherocketmen, all one word, waroftherocketmen.com. That's where you can find out the information about the crowdfunding campaign.
And I'll include all this information in the show notes. So if you're listening, just look at the show notes, and you'll have a link right there to go check it out. And on top of all them, I encourage you to go check it out and donate. I've donated myself, and it's worth it just to go and see the video that you made, John, with you walking on the ceiling. That's a ton of fun.
That was great.
And that made my day. So I can't encourage you guys enough. If you've enjoyed the 2 interviews that we've done, over the past couple of years, I think, you're going to enjoy everything else that they've got planned for this series. So I'm excited.
Well, I am too. And thank you, Dan, for having us on and having me on again the second time. Who would have thought that there could be anything more that we could talk about after my epic 5-hour interview in the first show? But thank you very much for having us both on, and Chris, thank you for doing this. As always, I always feel like I owe you so much, so I greatly appreciate it.
The other way around. Thank you so much for involving me in this project, and thanks for the interview. And this was just a lot of fun, and I look forward to doing more of them and continuing this wonderful journey.
Yeah.
Great. Well, thanks again, guys, and good luck with your campaign.
Okay, thanks, man. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Dan.
Thanks again to John and Chris for joining me for this episode. I always love talking to them and hope that they can come back for another round of questioning. Next week on the show, I'll be rejoined by my co-host Mark, and we'll be discussing our spoilery thoughts on Captain America Civil War. So be sure to subscribe and join us for that conversation. Of course, you can find all of our new Amazing Spider Talk and our very, very old Superior Spider Talk podcasts over at superiorspidertalk.com, or find us on iTunes and Stitcher and Google Play by searching for Amazing Spider Talk. And if you do, please be sure to leave us a review, as it's the way that we help our community grow. Also, be sure to check us out on Facebook and subscribe to our sister podcast, The Ultimate Spin, that covers Gwen Stacy and Miles Morales' adventures in the Spider-Verse. And most of all, be sure to leave us a voicemail with your questions at 9RedGoblin. Also, be sure to check out our friendly neighborhood Spider Talk Members Club so you can get all kinds of rewards, free comics, and listen in to our members-only episodes. Thanks again for joining us this week, and be sure to let us know what creators you'd love to hear from in the future. Excelsior!
Don't miss the next installment.
You know, for so long, I've thought that I never got any breaks. But now, after all I've been through, for once, I like my life. I like myself. And for the first time ever, I wouldn't want to change anything about me.
Gee, you're definitely not the same guy I've been writing about all these years.
Well, Stan,